Good evening, everyone. I hope you're all safe and well, and looking forward to potentially spending some time with your family soon. Tonight, we're joined by entrepreneur and author James Innes as he shares his experience of living with and combating depression. James, welcome.
Unmute myself. Hello. Thank you, Matt. Over to me.
Fantastic. No, James, firstly, thank you on behalf of Roundtable. Thank you so much for giving up your evening to join us and sort of share your experiences. So if you're happy just to perhaps give a brief introduction about yourself and get into it. I'll say to the guys that are watching, if you've got any questions that you'd like to post to James at the end, do put them in the comments box, and I will try and get through as many of them as possible at the end of the presentation from James. But yeah, James, over to you.
Okay, right. You thanked me for giving up my evening. Honestly, I'm delighted to be here. It gets me out of coping with the kids' bath time. I'd rather be anywhere than there right now. So thank you for that. A brief introduction. Well, I always find it difficult to explain myself. My nickname in the UK media is the Jobs Guru, which, well, it's an interesting nickname to have, shall we say. But hey, it sells, it works, it's good marketing. But really, I'm not here in that capacity. Yes, I might be an expert in recruitment, that's my day job, but I'm here very much to talk about depression. So who I am and what I do for a living and anything else about me is kind of irrelevant to that. I want to talk to you about depression, something that I'm definitely not an expert on. An expert on recruitment and such like, yes, but depression, no. I'm not a doctor, as Trump likes to say, or used to like to say anyway. Depression is something which always has been, and doubtless always will be, a significant part of my life. It's within that capacity that I'm here to talk about it. I'm here to share my experience, my personal experience, my private experience, even as private as this gets, of course, streams across Facebook, my private experience of depression with you. Basically, I'm here to speak as a so-called depressive, which is a term I don't actually like very much, but the dictionary definition is obviously a person suffering from or tending to suffer from depression. So yeah, that's me. And really, that's how I want you to see me tonight. Forget the work side of things, the business side of things, who I am. I am a depressive. What is depression? Well, I will talk about the science very briefly later. I don't want to bore you, but I will touch on it a bit later. But first, as I say, I want to give you something of my own personal perspective. Now, earlier this year, January, I think it was, I wrote a little article entitled Bitten by the Black Dog. This was before the pandemic really hit, by the way. We will talk about that a bit later as well, the pandemic and its impact on mental health worldwide, basically. But I happened to think, right, I want to start talking about this. I want to use my profile, my platform to share my experience of depression. I want to try to knock down some of those walls, break down some of the stigma. So I wrote a little article, Bitten by the Black Dog. It's been published in a couple of places now. It's next due to be published just next week in Rotary magazine, in fact. Now, the black dog, this references, there might be some historians amongst you, this references a phrase used by Churchill, fairly well known. It's a phrase I rather like. The historical evidence shows actually that it isn't or wasn't a reference to depression in any case, rather bad moods. It's an expression used by strict Victorian nannies, as it happens. Now there's an image. But the expression, the black dog, has now generally been adopted to refer to depression. And going off, just if you'll allow me, a little bit of a tangent here. A song actually came out this summer called Black Dog by a British girl called Arlo Parks. I first heard it on the radio just a couple of months ago. I thought I'd misheard it. No, seriously, I'm doing a series of talks called Bitten by the Black Dog, and now someone's brought a song out about it. It's not the best song I've ever heard, but it is interesting. And I've Googled the lyrics. It includes the following lines. It's so cruel what your mind can do for no reason. So far, so good. I take a jump off the fire escape to make the black dog go away. Now, I can't help but feel she might have come up with some better lyrics for that whole jumping off the fire escape bit, but still, the first two lines I do like, and the whole song is an interesting and certainly modern use of the black dog as a metaphor for depression. Anyway, back on track. So I begin my article with another quote, basically. It's words to the effect of which I've heard quite a few times in my life, along the lines of, this isn't from friends and family, this will be from an acquaintance, someone that knows me but doesn't know me well, and they've heard that I suffer from depression. When it's come up in conversation, their immediate reaction is, really, James? Well, you're the last person I can imagine suffering from depression. You're always so fun, so lively, so upbeat, positive about everything. I mean, I don't understand. It doesn't compute. How could you be depressive? Now, I'd say I've heard words to this effect quite a few times, and I don't really mind. In many ways, it's a compliment. I normally just sort of smile sweetly at them. But inside, I'm saying to myself, well, no, you don't understand, do you? And why should they? Because if you don't suffer from depression yourself, or know anyone who does, then indeed, why should you understand? Chances are, though, that you almost definitely do know someone who suffers from depression. The catch is that not everyone talks about it, and often for good reason. Now, I've never hidden my depression. I've never had a problem with disclosing it or discussing it, but I've never shouted it from the rooftops either, for reasons I'm sure you can understand. And this series of talks I've embarked on this year, well, it started with an article, then the pandemic hit, and then I thought, right, I saw what was happening to the nation's, let alone the world's mental health, and I thought, no, I need to do more than just write an article about this. So I embarked on this series of talks, but this is definitely a first for me this year to be so open about my depression. Not that I feel it's anything to be ashamed of, far from it. But whilst we have come a long way since I was first diagnosed, 26 years ago now, a whole quarter of a century, there is still considerable stigma. I'm 45, by the way, and if I look any younger, it's probably the good lighting in the spare bedroom and makeup and Botox. Anyway, so many people choose to keep their depression to themselves to avoid any possible negative reaction from others. They just don't want to take the risk, and I really can't blame them. Robin Williams, not Robbie Williams, as I accidentally said giving this talk last week, Robin Williams said, all it takes is a beautiful fake smile to hide an injured soul, and they will never notice how broken you really are. And talking of comedians who are, you probably know, notorious sufferers of depression, of course, a story is told, it was told to me just a few weeks ago by a friend, in fact, and I wanted to add it into my talk, that a man in the early 1800s, 200 and, sorry, my maths has gone out the window, 220 years ago, roughly, thereabouts, goes to visit a famous and undoubtedly rather expensive Harley Street doctor. He walks in. I can't eat, I can't sleep, says the man. I feel constantly miserable. Please help me, doctor. Doctor puffs out his chest. He clearly knows what he's talking about. He's in his element. He says, right, okay, well, I know what you need. Laughter. That's what you need, my friend. That's the best medicine for you. Take yourself off to Covent Garden Theatre. There you will find the great Grimaldi performing in Harlequin and Mother Goose or the Golden Egg. Exquisitely funny. This will cure you of all your ills. You don't need any pills or potions from my cabinet. And then he probably hands him the bill. The man looks at the doctor for a moment. He says, well, that won't help. Doctor, a little bit taken aback by this. He's an expert in what he does. He says, well, why not, sir? The man shrugs. He says, well, I am Grimaldi. Great, legendary comedian, and apparently a notorious sufferer of depression, like so many. The point I'm making is that it's so easy to hide depression, and yet actually so counterproductive. Yes, it's a natural instinct, and we can understand why people do it, but it is counterproductive. Cliche it may be, but a problem shared really can be a problem halved. And recent studies, and there were a lot of studies conducted during lockdown number 1, have shown how sociability can be immensely helpful for people experiencing depression. Now, my own mental health problems are something I often battle with on a daily basis. And so those who find me, whatever those lovely adjectives were, fun, lively, positive, I lap them up. What they don't realize is that this is quite simply my primary coping mechanism. And often it's an effort to get out of bed in the morning and face the world. And sometimes literally I have to slap myself around the face in the morning and force myself to conjure up some positive energy out of nowhere. It's the only way I'm able to function sometimes. Is every day like this? No, and thank God it isn't. But I do have patches where life can be like this, day after day after day. And I can tell you, it really can become a feat of endurance to survive some of these episodes. Not easy for me, no. Not easy for my poor wife either. Not as difficult as bath time, mind you. But she doesn't suffer from depression. She never has done and probably never will do. And so not only does she have to cope with my depression, but she also has to do so with an incomplete understanding of what depression is. Because really, unless you've experienced it yourself or really witnessed it close up firsthand, it really is very hard to describe. And I'm a writer, amongst other things. Matt didn't mention that, but I've also written a number of books. I'm supposed to have a way with words, but putting depression into words, expressing that concisely. I said, I'm right, I'm not a poet, but I guess an emptiness is one way, a feeling of there being like a kind of a void or a black hole inside one's psyche, like sucking in or positive emotion or positive energy, all happiness. A feeling of being just drained, emptied, no motivation, no energy. It's very hard to find the words, but in a nutshell, it's pretty unpleasant and actually pretty painful. That's something that people often don't realize, is the pain associated with it. Having experienced both mental pain and physical pain in my life, I'll take the physical pain any day. But then again, I can't say I've given birth. Apparently that does smart a little. But moving on, medically and scientifically speaking, what exactly is depression? I just want to, as I said earlier, briefly define it for those who are unsure and for those who simply don't know what causes depression. I think you're all on mute anyway. So I'm going to say, before I dig a hole for myself, is there a doctor in the house? No, good. Okay, no doctors here. So fine, I can carry on. Inevitably, there will be some doctors here, but I've faced doctors before, and they normally agree with my concise definition. Now, it's often described as a chemical imbalance in the brain. That in itself may be news to some, but it's nonetheless a great simplification of what is a very, very complex and nuanced illness. Yes, genetics and brain chemicals certainly come into it. Serotonin, you've probably heard of. Noradrenaline or norepinephrine, if you're American. Personally, I find noradrenaline much easier to pronounce. Dopamine, but depression is also closely linked to stressful and traumatic life events, which may trigger lifelong depression for some people, or may just result in episodic depression for others. So talking of stressful and traumatic life events, let's almost inevitably move on to COVID-19 and its impact on the world's mental health, and in particular, how it might be mitigated. So this whole situation isn't easy for many of us to one degree or another. Surveys show that many are feeling more anxious and depressed than normal. Many are having trouble sleeping. Many are having difficulty coping. At the very least, even if you have been enjoying chilling out at home on furlough and your garden's now immaculate, just like our neighbors, hate them, you're going to be feeling pretty unsettled, I think, at the least. Yeah. Now, quite early on in this whole coronavirus crisis, March, I think it was, my attention was caught by an article which made, I think it was BBC News. I printed it off, but I didn't print off the reference or the date. But okay, let's just assume it's BBC News in March. The article made reference to a paper in the Lancet Psychiatry. I'll quote from it. The paper says there is a risk that the numbers of people with depression and those self-harming or taking their own lives would increase. Sort of sounds self-evident now, but this was March. It's quite a long time ago. Lots happened since then, hasn't it? During the SARS epidemic of 2003, for example, there was a 30% increase in suicide in the over 65s, the paper adds. It added that the policies used to manage the pandemic would inevitably have serious effects on mental health by increasing unemployment, financial insecurity, and poverty. Well, we're seeing all of that come to light right now. Just today's news, obviously, Rishi Sunak and the projected unemployment figures. But I'll take my work hat back off again there. What interests me there is how so much of this has come to light and is coming to light. But the bit in the middle there, the SARS epidemic, drawing a parallel there, a 30% increase in suicide in the over 65s. Now, what's most interesting about that is that the over 65s is an age bracket which traditionally has a pretty low rate of suicide, actually. To put it in context, about a quarter of all suicides are in the 18 to 25 age bracket. About 2/3 men. Obviously, suicide is much more male than female, but certainly it is much more a youth problem than an older generation problem. That's a dramatic increase there. And more recently, September, this was, we had data released by the ONS, the Office for National Statistics. Whether you believe it or not, I know some of the data they've put out has been questioned extensively in the media, but this particular data suggested that twice as many adults in Britain are reporting symptoms of depression now by comparison to 2019, twice. 1 in 5, 20%. That's up from well, just 1 in 10, 10%. That's the background level, 10% of the adult population, but 20%, 1 person in 5. That really is one hell of an increase. And to be frank, one hell of a frightening increase. Make no mistake, COVID-19 kills, yes, but so does depression. I've lost friends to both this year. So what can people do about it? Well, I referenced earlier some studies showing how sociability can be immensely helpful for people experiencing depression. Well, obviously, the opposite applies. Isolate people, lock them down. Lockdown number 2 we're in at the moment, and many will become depressed, including many who have never previously experienced this illness and are therefore ill-equipped to cope with it. Now, I have a whole load of experience in coping with and surviving this illness, but if it's hitting you for the first time at the age of, say, 40, it's going to come as rather a shock. You don't have the tool set. You're not equipped to handle it. It's going to hit you out of the blue. So what can you do? Well, I'm just going to run through, paraphrasing, some of the key NHS guidelines because they put it much better than I ever could. So the first point on their list is to stay connected with others. Well, this is round table. I think staying connected with others is not something I need to lecture you on. It's something that we're good at. Second point, talk about your worries. Under this, they say it's normal to feel a bit worried, scared, or helpless about the current situation. Remember, it is okay to share your concerns with others you trust, and doing so may help them too. And the key point there is those last few words, doing so may help them too. I'm going to come on to that a bit later, ways of helping others and recognizing depression in others. But the key point there is that by opening up and sharing how you feel with somebody, it may well get them to open up themselves, and that can be particularly productive for you and for them indeed. Third point is to look after your body. A well-established link between physical health and mental health, certainly. Next point, stay on top of difficult feelings. It's normal to feel that things are out of your control, so try to focus on the things that you can control, how you act, who you speak to, where you get your information from, leading on to the next point, which is to not stay glued to the news. Now, I don't know about you, but I do actually, because I bet a lot of you are like me. In lockdown number 1, you were there every day for that daily news conference, the latest death toll. How grim is that? I remember with my wife, we had to start calling it the banana tally for the day, so the children wouldn't understand what we're talking about. We're there every day seeing what the latest data is. After a while, I realized that was not healthy. Lockdown number 2, started doing it again, started looking at that daily death count. Do I really need to know the precise number every day? Do I need to be that attached to the news every day? If you don't have any issues with mental health, fine, whatever. If you do, then avoid it. It's not healthy. Look after your sleep. Good quality sleep makes a big difference to how we feel. Well, there's no news there, is there? Try to maintain your regular sleeping patterns, stick to good sleep practices, yes, whatever. But the important point there is that there is a very well-established link between sleep and mental health, and indeed physical health. High blood pressure, for example, quite closely connected to the quality of sleep and sleep issues. But mental health is one of the first to suffer when someone has issues with their sleep. What do you do if you are having problems with your sleep? Well, you can speak to your GP about it. I said this before a few months ago, and someone said to me, I can't go to my GP to talk about sleep problems. My GP's kind of got better and more important things to be doing. Like, well, there's a pandemic at the moment. Have you noticed? I can't go and say, oh, doc, I'm having difficulty sleeping. So I spoke to my GP here, who happens to be a friend of mine. And I said, how would you feel if someone booked in to speak to you because of a sleep issue? Either they can't get to sleep at night, or they're waking up in the middle of the night, or conversely, maybe they're sleeping too much, lacking energy, and they're staying in bed too long in the morning. Easily done in lockdown, for example, working from home. I said, how would you feel about this? Would you feel they're wasting your time? And surely, you're a highly qualified medical professional, you've got better things to be doing. And he said, well, no, because we all recognize, us doctors, the link there between sleep and people's general well-being and health, in particular their mental health. I'd rather tackle the problem at the root than have to tackle it further down the line and put them on fluoxetine, venlafaxine, whatever, and send them off to a psychotherapist. So no, absolutely, my door would be open for that. And I got an email from the NHS's patient access scheme a few weeks ago, which made the same point. Sleep is crucial to our well-being, etc., etc. If your sleeping problems persist, your GP can advise you on the next steps to take to get back on track directly from the NHS. And the final point is keep your mind active. Again, round table. I don't think I need to dwell on that particular point. I think, again, we're good at that. So I said I'd also like, because I think this is particularly useful, to give you some valuable information on how to help someone with depression. Again, from our wonderful NHS. Not quoting Boris Johnson there. How to help someone with depression is the title of this particular set of guidelines. nice and clear there. It starts with the signs that somebody might be depressed. Now that's a little bit confusing because a couple of examples. Sleep to start with, for example, is sleeping more than usual or isn't able to sleep. Two opposite ends of the spectrum there. Is overeating or has lost their appetite. And it goes on like that. Basically, it's very hard. What you're looking for is a marked change in behavior, which may come across over a period of a few days or a few weeks. Often it's something I personally find difficult to notice in myself. My wife's like to spot it before I do, actually, if I'm going downhill. It can creep up very gradually. But if you're concerned about someone, a friend or a family member, don't expect them to necessarily seem down. What you might first notice is just they're not quite in themselves. There's a change in their behavior, a shift of some sort. It might be something very basic like their energy levels or indeed their appetite. So they move on to the tips to help someone who seems down, as the expression I just used, which is a little bit derogatory, but never mind. Let them know you care and are there to listen. Accept them as they are without judging them. Gently encourage them to help themselves. Now that's the tricky one. Gently encourage them to help themselves. Well, how do you do that? I've known a lot of people who suffer from depression over my life. Some I've been able to help. As a fellow sufferer, I've been able to assist them. Others I haven't. Others I failed dismally. I've tried to lead that horse to water, but I haven't been able to make it drink. It's very frustrating. I know that if they did actually go and seek some help, or at least the first step of recognizing that they have a problem and do need help, let alone going and seeking that help, it could do wonders for them. Gently encourage them to help themselves, are the words there. And I will reference back to what I said earlier about the best way to do that really is to share your own concerns, open up to them, talk to them. That's the way to do it. Even if you're not suffering greatly, as I said, you surely must be feeling unsettled by this year. I don't think anybody's feeling great about this year, are they? Perhaps, I don't know, the owner of Amazon maybe, but generally I think everyone is at the very least unsettled. Share that with those about whom you have concerns. If you're worried about a friend or a family member, approach them and say, can I have a talk? I need someone to talk to. I'm not feeling great at the moment, and it's not surprising. I know what everyone's going through. Launch into the conversation that way. Open up to them first and draw them out. Sounds manipulative, but you're doing it to help them. It really is one of the very best techniques I can recommend. But even then, it won't work on everybody. Stay in touch with them by messaging, texting, phoning. Get information about the services available to them, for example, psychotherapy. Well, once you've got someone to recognize that they have a problem, the next step is to get them to want someone to help them with that problem. And then it's actually find that help. Now, psychotherapy, taking that first step and going to see a psychotherapist isn't easy, being they've done that. I think it's a lot easier now because it can be done by Skype. And in fact, psychotherapists would love the business right now. So there are plenty of psychotherapists available, easily done by Skype from the comfort of your own home. That initial session is absolutely critical. Getting someone to that initial session, through that initial session is really valuable. Once they've done that, the chances are they will go further. But it's those first few steps are the most difficult. And in terms of helping somebody else, the ones where you really need to just stand by them and get them through that. Try to be patient. Yes. Okay. And don't, whatever you, this is I've added this bit. Don't, whatever you do, tell them to pull themselves together. I mean, this is 2020. We should have moved on from that stiff upper lip, mustachioed Movember upper lip, whatever it might be. There's no man up involved here. We need to knock down these walls, break through the ridiculous stigma. Finally, if the person you're worried about expresses suicidal feelings, or even if you're just very worried about them, they don't need to actually express suicidal feelings, then you need to seek professional help urgently. This is an important point, the final point they make on their list of guidelines here, because most people think that you only call the Samaritans or NHS 111 if you have a problem yourself. No, you can call them because you're worried about somebody else. Samaritans in particular, 116, 123, but even NHS 111, you're worried about somebody else. You're trying to help them. You think you're making some progress, or maybe you're not making any progress at all. That could be the point. But you need help. You're not sure what to do. Call an expert. They will gladly give you some tips and advice. It's what they're there for. The Samaritans are not just there to talk someone down when they're just about to jump off a bridge. No, they're to help their friends or family at a much earlier stage if you only reach out and ask them. So I'd like to finish by evidently thanking you for having me here today, especially Matt Fennon for extending the kind invitation in the first place, and Richard Holland for introducing us to each other. But thank you all. Naturally, more than happy to take any questions. In fact, I'd relish some good questions. I don't know if there's been any popping up in the chat or whatever.
No, I've had a few questions come through, James, and actually just a couple of questions for myself. Yeah, firstly, that was great. Thank you. I was just interested. I think you said you've been suffering for, give or take, 20 years. I was wondering at what point in your life did you recognise that actually that there was a problem and it was depression? And then, I guess, two parts. Second part is, at what point did you come to accept it, that that's what it was, and you've got to deal with it in whichever way you need to?
Gosh, Matt, straight in there with the big questions. Okay, the first one is, there's a lot of depression in my family. Depression isn't always genetic, but there's often a genetic element to it. As a child, I was, shall we say, a bit odd. I'm not going to dwell on that. I was taken to see my first psychiatrist when I was 14, because my behavior was, I was not a good boy at school. And again, I'm not going to dwell on that any further. But definitely, these were signs of underlying issues with mental health. It was in my late teens that I first thought to myself, I reached a certain sort of rock bottom. At the time, it was with alcohol. I reached a certain rock bottom. And I said rock bottom, but I was about to say, instead of going further down into that rock bottom, I decided, no, I've got to do something here. I need to seek help. And that was, it was an excellent decision. I don't know, it was a brave decision, but I thought, I just can't go on like this. I need to seek help. And the second part of your question, remind me, rephrase it.
The point to which you came to accept that it was an illness and not something you had to get over.
That's the word I was looking for. Accept. That was much later. I knew I had a problem. I knew I needed help. The point of acceptance didn't really come, honestly, until my mid to late 30s. In the past 5 to 10 years, have I actually come to terms with it and come to accept it, which is probably not the answer we're expecting. But yes, I first went along, got diagnosed, got on the medication when I was 19. I had years of psychotherapy in my early 20s, but it really wasn't until my mid to late 30s that I actually did come to accept it, come to terms with it and go, right, this is just a part of me. Up until that point, I was always resisting it and always wanting to wean myself off the medication, always trying to deny it. And just not fully facing up to it. And it's really only in the past 5 to 10 years that I really have fully come to accept it. Good question.
Good, thank you. I've had a couple of other questions come directly from the stream. One is because you obviously referred to sleep, and it was if you're tossing and turning, how do you actually try and send yourself to sleep? Have you got any tips for getting yourself off to sleep?
Gosh, okay, another good question. You're really grilling me today. Avoid alcohol, because that does not help. Avoid popping pills, although if you really are suffering badly, popping a pill, obviously I'm talking about prescription medicine here, anti-anxiety tablets or even sleeping pills, that's better than using alcohol. This is what a lot of people do with sleep issues, including depressives. They want to switch off their brain, they want to get to sleep, and they do it with alcohol or drugs, whether legitimate or otherwise. So avoid that. I find, without getting too spiritual here, I find that yoga and meditation have helped me a lot in my life. I first discovered yoga in my early 20s. I think meditation in my mid 20s. I went to a Buddhist temple in London for quite some time, learning meditation. I don't have precious little time for that these days with the hordes of children I have stampeding about the house. But in bed at night, yes, if I am having difficulty sleeping, I find that certain relaxation, breathing, just simple breathing meditation. There's a link there between meditation and yoga. Yoga often includes a breathing meditation, can help. Simple techniques like that, just calming your breathing, focusing on your breathing, focusing on your diaphragm, or focusing on your musculature through the body from your toes upwards and just calming it, focusing on each part of the body at a time and calming it and soothing it. Those sorts of mental techniques or centering techniques is perhaps more well-known, and certainly in business senses. Before going to give a major sales pitch or something, people often center. That sort of technique I find is very helpful personally in getting to sleep.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Another one we've had through is it's quite specific. I don't know whether you're well placed to answer this. But anyway, here we go.
Not a doctor.
I've been through CBT that I was referred to by my GP, but I don't think it really worked. Should I go back to my GP, or are there other better options?
Go back to the GP. Absolutely, go back to the GP. Say, I've done that. It didn't work. What are my alternatives? There are other forms of therapy. Certainly, I personally undertook CAT therapy, cognitive analytical therapy. There are certainly differences between different forms of therapy, and it's also very much about the relationship one has with the therapist. Not every therapist is right for every patient. You need to be comfortable with them. There's a certain chemistry, a certain alchemy that's quite important to the process. So to elaborate on what I said earlier, yes, getting to that first meeting with a psychotherapist is very important, very, very critical step. But you might not necessarily continue with that same psychotherapist. You might then see another one and another one before you hit on one that with whom you really connect and feel comfortable. Because it's quite a journey. It's quite a grueling process. It can be, depending on what issues you have to go through, to deal with. And obviously beyond that, discuss with the GP potentially the medicinal options as well. I don't want to promote necessarily the medicinal options. For some people, they're not necessary. For others, they are. I've had years of psychotherapy, but still require medication for life. But it depends on the individual. But certainly in a short term, I would say, in a short term, why not try a low dose of some form of medication whilst perhaps embarking on another form of psychotherapy? But absolutely don't give up at that stage. Just because you've had one dose of CBT and it hasn't worked out for you. No, absolutely. Go back and see what else. And if you're not happy with that GP, find another one. This is very, very important.
That's great. Thanks, James. And actually, there's something you touched on earlier. So, as you said, we should be encouraged to be speaking out if we are suffering. But how would you recommend we select that person that we confide in? Who, how do we? Because it's very daunting to even have the courage to then speak out. But how do we go about picking that one person?
You feel a need to speak about it with somebody else. If you want to take that first step towards sharing how you're feeling with somebody, very, very difficult. I mean, I really don't think I can advise on that. I think it's different for everybody. I'm very lucky in that in my family, we're all pretty open. So there's no great taboo with discussing it. For me, for the rest of my family, indeed with my parents, I think I spoke initially most with my mother about it. Not everyone has that kind of relationship with their parents. It depends. So I think it really does depend on the individual. I wish I could be more constructive than that. It really does depend on the individual circumstances. You need somebody clearly who you think will listen. That's critical, but will also empathize. Somebody who has a fair degree of emotional intelligence to be able to project, put themselves in your shoes. So avoid any self-centered friends you might have or any particularly narcissistic friends. Focus on people who are comfortable talking about emotions, feelings already, and do have, as I say, a high emotional intelligence, basically. But I think who that person is varies very much from one individual next. It could be somebody close to you, it could be your mother, it could be your wife, it could be your best friend, or it might not. It could be somebody at work. You might need that distance. So it depends on them. It also depends on you. Do you want someone that close, or do you need someone with whom there is a bit of distance that you don't see quite so often, for example?
That's great. Thank you, James. It's turning into a bit of and I didn't foresee it being a bit of not an agony aunt session, but it's a question of picking your brains as to what you'd recommend.
That's fine. I've been doing this all year. I've had all sorts of questions, weird and wonderful amongst them. So yeah.
Okay, well, I just had one that's actually come through, which is it's reasonably personal in as far as the person said, in light of the recent news about being able to see families over Christmas. This chap has said he's had messages from his parents expecting him to go and spend Christmas with them, and actually he's saying he would much rather, for a number of reasons, stay away from it. Actually, from his own mental health reasons, he doesn't actually want to spend time. I guess there are other influences as well going on, but he's worried about letting his parents down. but he feels that he can't go back. It's probably an impossible question to answer, but any sort of advice you might be able to.
That's a really interesting question. No, I haven't had one along those lines. Obviously, this whole Christmas situation's only just come up fairly recently, but I haven't had any question along those lines earlier in the year. You're forgetting the Christmas element about going to see parents. I assumed when you started the question, Matt, that you were going to say, because of COVID-19, he didn't want to go, but because of his own mental health. I see. Very interesting question. I would say that his mental health has to come first. Difficult situation. There's no silver bullet. There's no perfect solution to this. But I would say, dishonest as it may be, white lie possibly, pull the COVID-19 card and say, look, Mum, Dad, I just can't risk it. I just can't risk it. I don't know his circumstances. Maybe he's quite a social guy. Maybe he has to go to work in an office. Maybe he has to travel on the train. I don't know, but if you can use something, but I just can't risk bringing this to you. I love you. I can't take that risk. Yes, I know it is legally acceptable. The Prime Minister has opened up, but he did say, do be jolly careful nonetheless. Use your common sense. I don't know how old his parents are even, but I would say try to play that card as an excuse, but put your mental health first, definitely. I'm not someone who normally puts myself first, ever. But when it comes to mental health, there's one of the times when you really have to. You really have to put yourself first. It's counterproductive to do otherwise.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you, James. As I said at the start, thank you for giving up your time and sharing your experiences, being very open and honest about your 20 years of dealing with depression and how you're dealing with it now. And I know certainly the guys who've been messaging me, not necessarily with questions, but certainly comments, have found this all fascinating and really helpful. And as you touched on, in terms of Roundtable being an organisation for men up to the age of 45, as I'm sure you're aware, obviously suicide being the biggest killer of men in that demographic, that we as an organisation take it very seriously, that we do stay connected during time, on the basis that we are a social organisation, and it's very difficult to be social when we have lockdowns and restrictions, and we can't get together because lots of our members do join the organisation for that fellowship and for that camaraderie and the opportunity to get out there. And actually, when the reason that they've potentially joined is removed, it's very difficult. So doing things like this and having speakers like yourself is really important for us as a touch point to our members, and something different to engage with, and if it's a situation like this where it's educational and providing help for guys that are sat at home as well, it's win-win. So again, thank you for giving up your time. It's been really appreciated. Thanks, James.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. It's been an honor.
Thank you.